In the break room, amidst pastel balloons and cupcakes, applause echoed as I handed the final gift to the glowing mother-to-be, my stepmother. "Come up for photos." My father, the CEO, beckoned with his perfect corporate smile. 3 minutes later, after the flashes faded, she dragged me into the supply closet. The door clicked shut. Her slap was so sharp it split my lip. "You smile when I tell you to," she whispered. I tasted iron, saw her lipstick smeared on a box of diapers, and decided to burn their world down from the inside. My name is Ava Calder. As the head of risk analytics for Virion and Vale, my job is to quantify disaster. I model financial collapse, chart the fallout from industrial accidents, and calculate the precise cost of a damaged reputation. My world is one of actuarial tables, predictive algorithms, and the cold, hard logic of consequence. Today, my job was to host a baby shower. The directive had come down from HR, couched in the syrupy language of corporate synergy, a family recommendation. The email read, "A wonderful opportunity to celebrate the V&V family culture." It was, of course, a command performance. The party was being held on the 28th floor of the North Lake Tower, our corporate headquarters, in a conference space repurposed into a pastel nightmare. The floor-to-ceiling windows, which normally offered a commanding God's-eye view of the city, were now fogged with the saccharine haze of the event. The air, usually a crisp, climate-controlled testament to efficiency, was thick with the scent of buttercream and baby powder. Virion and Vale's signature cobalt blue was tastefully, and nauseatingly, woven into the ribbons on gift bags and the fondant on the cupcakes. A team from internal communications darted through the crowd, their cameras flashing, documenting this mandatory fun for the company newsletter. This wasn't a celebration, it was a PR campaign, and the product being launched was my father's new family. I am 32 years old. My official title is Senior Vice President, but in the unwritten org chart of this company, my most relevant credential is being the daughter of the CEO. And today, I was the master of ceremonies, a role I performed with the practiced smile of a hostage reading a script. At the center of it all was Savannah, my stepmother. At 29, she was 3 years my junior, a lifestyle influencer who had married my father 2 years after my mother's death. She sat enthroned on a white wicker chair, a Madonna in a cream-colored maternity dress that clung to her belly with an almost religious devotion. She radiated a soft, curated glow, one hand perpetually resting on the swell of her stomach as if cradling the company's future heir. Her every move was calibrated for the camera, her laughter a musical, tinkling sound that never quite reached her eyes. She was Savannah Calder now, the chief culture muse of Virion and Vale, an unofficial title that gave her the authority to meddle in everything from marketing campaigns to personnel decisions, all without a shred of accountability. I was in the middle of a pre-written joke about diaper brands when my father's voice cut through the polite laughter. "Ava, come up for photos." Graham Calder, our CEO, stood beside Savannah's throne, his smile the same one he deployed for the cover of Forbes. It was wide, white, and utterly devoid of warmth. He gestured for me to come closer, an impatient flick of his fingers that said, "Get in position." I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the cold weight of filial duty. I walked over, the synthetic cheer on my face feeling like a mask made of cheap plastic. The internal comms photographer directed us. "A little closer, Ava. Graham, put your arm around her. Perfect. A real family moment." I stood rigid as my father's hand rested on my shoulder, the weight of it both proprietary and dismissive. Savannah leaned into me, her perfume cloying, and whispered, "Isn't this just perfect?" Her breath was warm against my ear. The flashbulbs popped, momentarily bleaching the world white, capturing a lie for the internal weekly bulletin. The applause that followed was thin, obligatory. The party was winding down. As I stepped away, relieved the performance was over, Savannah's fingers clamped around my wrist, her nails, filed to perfect ovals and painted a demure shade of pearl, dug into my skin. "Help me with a gift," she said, her public voice still sweet as honey, but her eyes were chips of ice. She didn't wait for an answer, simply pulled me with surprising strength towards the small kitchen and catering area off to the side. She bypassed the kitchen and yanked me toward an unmarked door, a supply closet. She pushed me inside, the scent of industrial cleaner and cardboard filling my nostrils. The door swung shut behind us, plunging us into the dim light of a single, buzzing fluorescent strip. Before I could process what was happening, she slid the bolt lock home. The sound was a heavy, definitive click. The space was tight, crammed with boxes of printer paper, stacks of old marketing materials, and forgotten holiday decorations. She let go of my wrist and turned to face me, the curated softness gone from her face, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "What is this?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the alarm bells screaming in my head. Her answer wasn't verbal, it was a blur of motion. Her arm swung, and the slap was a stunning, explosive sound in the confined space. My head snapped to the side, my cheek erupting in a firestorm of pain. I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood as my teeth cut the inside of my lip. A small diamond earring she wore had scratched a hot line across my cheekbone. I staggered back, my hand flying to my face. The shock was a physical thing, a jolt that seemed to reset my entire nervous system. I stared at her, trying to reconcile the smiling Madonna from the party with the venomous creature standing before me. "Stop looking like you own this place," she hissed, her voice a low, vicious whisper. "You walk around with that quiet, superior look on your face, like you're just waiting for all of this to be yours. It's not, it's mine now. He's mine. This baby is the future of this company, not you." My training kicked in. Risk analysis isn't just about numbers. It's about seeing the whole board, identifying threats, and finding leverage in chaos. My eyes, watering from the impact, flickered upwards, and there it was, tucked in the corner where the wall met the ceiling, a small, black dome with a single, unblinking red light, a security camera. My posture changed. I let my shoulders slump, allowed a tremor to enter my voice. I widened my eyes, playing the part of the terrified victim to perfection. I needed to keep her here. I needed to give the camera a few more seconds of footage. "Savannah, I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, letting my fear sound genuine. It only fueled her rage. "Don't play dumb with me, Ava. The way you presented that gift, the way you spoke, it's always a performance, a little stunt to remind everyone that you're a Calder, that you were here first." She took a step closer, her body radiating a palpable heat of fury. "Let me be clear. One more stunt, one more look, one more move that I don't like, and your father cuts you out. Completely. He'll do it for me. He'll do it for the baby." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She believed it, and the worst part was, she was probably right. I stood my ground, letting the silence stretch, giving the camera a full, unobstructed view of her contorted face, of my bleeding lip. Then, slowly, I straightened my spine, I lifted my chin, I met her gaze, and for the first time, I let her see the cold, analytical mind working behind my eyes. The fear I had feigned evaporated, replaced by something much harder, much more dangerous. I brought my thumb to my mouth and deliberately wiped away the smear of blood from my lip, examining it for a moment before dropping my hand. Her confident sneer faltered. She saw the shift, the change in the atmosphere. She had made a critical miscalculation. She had treated me like a rival stepdaughter. She had forgotten that I was the head of risk. Without another word, I turned, slid the bolt back with a loud, metallic scrape, and opened the door. The cheerful din of the party washed back over us. I stepped out of the darkness and back into the light, leaving her standing alone among the boxes. The room fell silent as I walked directly to the podium, my stride measured and confident. I could feel every eye in the room on me, on the faint red mark already darkening on my cheek. I ignored their curious stares, ignored my father's confused frown, ignored Savannah as she emerged from the closet behind me, her face pale. I picked up the microphone. The feedback shrieked for a second before I adjusted it. I looked out at the sea of faces, colleagues, subordinates, the architects of my public humiliation. I gave them the brightest, sharpest smile I could muster. "Thank you all for your patience," I said, my voice clear and ringing, with no trace of the violence that had just occurred. "Now, for our final activity before we cut the cake, let's play a game." A wave of relieved laughter and applause rippled through the room. They thought the awkward tension was broken. They had no idea it was just beginning. No one knew that 75 feet away, a hard drive was logging a 7-second video file that had just become the single greatest asset in my portfolio. To the outside world, Virion and Vale is the Calder family empire, a gleaming monolith of modern American capitalism with a heart. The business journals praise our market dominance in logistics and tech infrastructure, but it's the lifestyle magazines that print the narrative my father has so carefully constructed. We are featured for our philanthropic galas, our billion-dollar charitable foundation, and our progressive corporate culture, summed up in the ubiquitous motto etched into the frosted glass of our lobby: "We are one family." It's a brilliant piece of branding. A family, after all, protects its own. It forgives indiscretions. It demands loyalty. And it handles its problems behind closed doors. The game I had just announced in the break room was a family matter. I didn't parachute into my position. I started at 24, fresh out of business school with a master's in quantitative analysis. My father insisted I learn the company from the engine room up. I spent 2 years in supply chain optimization, learning the rhythms of our warehouses and the brutal efficiency of our shipping lanes. I did another 2 in corporate finance, memorizing the intricate dance of capital and debt that kept the empire solvent. Then came 3 years in acquisitions, where I learned that the most valuable asset isn't what you buy, but the leverage you gain. Only then, with a deep, granular understanding of the company's every vulnerability, did I move into risk. I was good at my job because I knew precisely where all the cracks in our foundation were. The largest of those cracks appeared 2 years after my mother lost her battle with cancer. His name was Savannah. My father didn't just remarry, he orchestrated a merger. The wedding was a meticulously planned media event, a strategic partnership between old money and new influence. It was covered by Vogue, featured in Town and Country, and generated a blizzard of hashtags that were tracked by our marketing department like a new product launch. Savannah, the influencer, became Savannah Calder, the asset, overnight. The company's narrative shifted to include her. She was installed in the corporate hierarchy with the nebulous, unassailable title of Chief Culture Muse. It came with no official duties and no direct reports, which made it the most powerful position in the building besides my father's. She was the ghost in the machine. Her influence felt everywhere. She would walk through a department, and the next day, the office layout would be changed to improve its aesthetic flow. She would have a brief conversation with a junior marketing associate, and a week later, that associate would be promoted to a senior role, bypassing a dozen more qualified candidates. Her whims became corporate policy, her tastes became brand directives, and her dislikes became personnel problems. Shortly after she started making her presence felt, I was summoned by the head of human resources, a woman named Carol, who had been with the company for 20 years. Carol's office was a shrine to corporate platitudes, with framed posters that said things like integrity and teamwork. She offered me a bottle of artisanal water and a painfully sympathetic smile. She began, her voice a practiced, soothing balm. "We know this transition can't be easy. Having Savannah here, in such a visible role." "Her role isn't on any org chart I've seen," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "It's more of a conceptual position," Carol explained, waving a dismissive hand. "Graham feels she brings a fresh energy. It's about optics, projecting a modern, family-forward image." She leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "Look, All we're asking is that you be gentle. Make her feel welcome. The optics of you two getting along are incredibly important for the internal communication strategy. Then came the carrot. Graham is looking to create a new executive VP position next year. Head of Global Risk Strategy, a seat at the big table. He's mentioned that your cooperation in smoothing this transition would weigh heavily in his decision. The message was clear. Play the part of the happy, blended family, and I would be rewarded, make waves, and I would be sidelined. I agreed. Of course. I smiled. I nodded. I promised to be a team player. And then I went back to my office and began to do my job. I started analyzing the newest, most volatile risk to the company, Savannah herself. It began as a professional habit, a hunch. Risk analysts are trained to spot anomalies, the little data points that don't fit the pattern. The first one I found was in the quarterly expense reports for the Employee Wellness Fund. It was a budget I knew well, designed for things like gym subsidies, mental health workshops, and ergonomic chairs. But under Savannah's tenure as Muse, the fund's expenditures had ballooned. I dug deeper, cross-referencing vendor codes and invoice numbers on quiet Saturday afternoons when the 28th floor was empty. The line items were coded vaguely. Employee morale event, team building offsite, wellness initiative, but the vendors were high-end florists, exclusive caterers, and luxury event planners. These weren't company workshops. They were Savannah's personal parties, her birthday brunch, a summer solstice gathering at her Hamptons rental, a lavish dinner for her influencer friends, all paid for by the Virion and Vale Employee Wellness Fund. I built a parallel ledger, a ghost account of her abuses, meticulously documenting every fraudulent charge. I saw how the system was designed to protect her. Anyone who questioned a charge was met with a polite but firm wall from HR. Question it again, and you'd find yourself transferred. The whispers in the hallways were quiet but consistent. The senior accountant who flagged an invoice from a Parisian boutique was suddenly reassigned to our processing center in Omaha. The marketing manager who pushed back on Savannah's demand to use a friend's unqualified photography studio for a national campaign was now overseeing regional logistics in Buffalo. Everyone knew the unspoken rule: you don't cross the family, you certainly don't cross the new wife. So, for 3 years, I kept my head down, I played my part, I smiled at company events, offered polite greetings in the hallway, and watched as she turned my father's company into her personal piggy bank. And with the dispassionate precision of my profession, I continued to gather data. I archived emails, I downloaded expense reports, I saved server logs. I treated the corruption like a slow-moving storm system, charting its path, calculating its potential impact, and waiting for it to make landfall. Today's baby shower was the hurricane. It was the single most extravagant wellness event to date. The budget I saw was staggering, charged to the fourth quarter wellness fund and exceeding its total allocation by 320%. It was an act of such brazen arrogance that it could only mean one thing. She felt untouchable. She believed she was no longer just a part of the family. She was the company's future. In that supply closet, as the pain bloomed on my cheek, everything crystallized. Her words, "Your father cuts you out," were not just a threat. They were a statement of her perceived power. The slap wasn't just a personal assault. It was a corporate action. It happened on company property, during a company-sanctioned event. She had finally made a mistake that couldn't be buried in a spreadsheet. She had created a new kind of liability, one that couldn't be coded as employee wellness. As I stood at the podium, smiling into the microphone, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, I had been living in a polished, well-lit prison, my emotions suppressed, my anger compressed into a tight, dense core. Savannah thought the slap was an assertion of dominance, the final word in our silent war. She was wrong. It was the trigger. It was the data point that completed the model. The surface of our perfect family company had been breached. Beneath it was a turbulent sea of fraud, abuse, and corruption. And I was the only one holding the map. The game was trivial, something involving guessing the flavors of baby food. I guided them through it on autopilot, my voice a smooth, professional veneer over the riot of calculations firing in my mind. My cheek throbbed with a dull, insistent rhythm, a human metronome counting down the seconds until I could act. When the cake was finally rolled out, a multi-tiered confection of white and gold, I feigned a sudden, splitting migraine. I murmured apologies to a few concerned executives and made my escape. My destination was not the parking garage. It was the corporate medical office on the 12th floor. The nurse, a kind, motherly woman named Brenda, tutted with sympathy when she saw me. I told her I'd stumbled, catching my face on the corner of a filing cabinet, a clumsy, believable lie. I did not ask for ice. I asked for the room's tablet device. I need to document this for an internal safety report, I said, my voice flat. It was the language of compliance, and she understood it. In the sterile, white light of the examination room, I used the device's camera. I took 3 photos of my cheek and one of my split lip. The camera's software automatically embedded a metadata tag, the date, the time to the millisecond, and the device's unique network ID. Exhibit A was secured. The hidden bruise was now a time-stamped, internally verifiable piece of evidence. Back in my own office, the 28th floor was quieting down. The remnants of the party were being discreetly cleared away by the catering staff. The city outside my window was beginning to glitter as dusk settled. I sat down at my terminal, the low hum of the machine a familiar comfort. My fingers moved across the keyboard with cold precision. I composed a new email. The recipients were my own corporate account and the general inbox for Virion and Vale Security. The subject line was deliberately bland. Log preservation request. The body was equally sterile. A minor workplace incident occurred in the vicinity of the 28th floor supply closet at approximately 15:45. As a precautionary measure, please ensure all access logs and security footage for this area from 1530 to 1600 are preserved and not overwritten. A formal follow-up will be provided. I hit send. The email was not an accusation, it was a legal tripwire. By sending it, I created a permanent server-level record of a request. Any subsequent deletion of the footage would no longer be routine data management. It would be evidence tampering. Next, I accessed the company's internal policy server. I opened document 7.4b, Code of Conduct and Workplace Safety. I scrolled down to Section 3, Subsection C. The language was boilerplate, drafted by a team of risk-averse lawyers. Virion and Vale maintains a zero-tolerance policy regarding acts of violence, threats, or physical intimidation between employees. Any reported instance of such behavior is subject to a mandatory and immediate investigation, with no exceptions for seniority or position. No exceptions. The words glowed on my screen. I had the policy. Now, I needed to establish a pattern. I navigated to a secure, encrypted partition on my local drive. Inside was a folder labeled Audits. Within that, another, HR Access Q2 2024. A year ago, I had conducted a top-to-bottom audit of HR's data security protocols. For 72 hours, I had sysadmin-level access to their entire filing system. I was looking for security flaws, but I found something else. I opened a file. The case number was redacted in my copy, but I knew the name of the employee, a young executive assistant named Jessica. The official file was labeled Confidential Wellness Matter. The contents told a different story. It was an NDA, a settlement. The assistant had been paid $80,000 in exchange for her silence after Savannah, in a fit of rage over a scheduling mistake, had thrown a scalding hot cup of coffee at her. The document meticulously released the company from all liability. It was HR's playbook for handling Savannah, not as a threat to be managed, but as a crisis to be contained and concealed. I had their playbook. Now for the keystone. I used my credentials to access the security server that housed the footage from the 28th floor. I found the camera feed for the supply closet. I located the file by its timestamp. There it was. 7 seconds of silent, high-definition video, the door closing, her face, twisted in a snarl, her arms swinging, the impact. My head snapping back. It was clean, unambiguous, and utterly damning. I initiated the download. The file was 112 megabytes. As soon as it finished, I ran a command line utility to generate an SHA-256 hash. The program spit out a long string of letters and numbers, a unique digital fingerprint. This hash proved the file was authentic and unaltered from the moment of its creation. Chain of custody was established. I couldn't leave the file on the company network. I composed a new message in a standalone PGP encryption client. I attached the video file and the text file containing the hash. I encrypted the message using my personal public key and sent it to my private, anonymous email address. A secure, off-site copy now existed. For the final layer of redundancy, I took the private decryption key, a long, complex passphrase, printed it on a small slip of paper, and shut down my machine. Tomorrow morning, that slip of paper would go into a small waterproof bag and be tucked into the back of my locker at the company gym, a place no one would ever think to look. My final actions for the night were swift. I opened my corporate calendar. I created a new meeting request for 9 a.m. the next day. The attendees were myself and Robert Thorne, the company's general counsel. I did not invite my father. I did not invite anyone from HR. The subject line was stark. Urgent risk escalation, fiduciary and personnel matter. To the invitation, I attached a single file. The Q4 expense report for the Employee Wellness Fund. I used the annotation tool to draw a bright red box around the line items for the baby shower, with its 320% budget overrun. I didn't need to add any other commentary. Robert was a numbers guy. He would understand. I was presenting him with two distinct, but now linked, corporate crises: assault and embezzlement. I hit send. The invitation flew into the digital ether. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent office. The throbbing in my cheek had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. The slap had been intended to put me in my place, to remind me of my insignificance in the new Calder dynasty. But it had done the opposite. It had given me a legal cause of action, a tangible piece of irrefutable proof. Savannah and my father and the HR department that enabled them had spent years building a beautiful stage set, a polished facade of a happy, functional family company. The slap was never going to be just about the slap. My plan was to pull down the rigging, cut the lights, and bring the entire rotten stage crashing down around them. The hours between the end of the party and the 9 a.m. meeting with General Counsel were a compressed eternity. Sleep was an unaffordable luxury, fueled by black coffee and a cold. Clarifying rage, I transformed my office into a war room. The first front I opened was the one Savannah herself had so carefully constructed, her public image. Every week, like clockwork, she posted a bump update to her 30 million followers. She would tag Virion and Vale, framing her pregnancy as the ultimate testament to the company's family-first culture. I scrolled through the feed, a gallery of calculated vulnerability. Here she was in a cashmere sweater, hand cupping her belly, captioned, "Blessed Vandvi family." Here she was, again, supposedly in a meeting, with a title card reading, "Baby's First Boardroom." It was a masterclass in branding, a seamless fusion of her lifestyle influencer persona and her new role as the corporate matriarch in waiting. The public consumed it, celebrated it, but I wasn't the public. I was a risk analyst. My eyes landed on a post from 3 weeks prior. It was a picture of a sonogram, the grainy black and white image held delicately in her manicured fingers. "Heard our little one's heartbeat for the first time today. Such a magical moment," the caption read. The date on the sonogram printout was clearly visible. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I pulled up Savannah's executive travel schedule, a shared calendar I had access to for coordinating management offsites. On the date of that magical moment, Savannah's calendar had her blocked out for the entire day. She wasn't at a doctor's office in the city. She was in Chicago, on a brand research trip that I now saw involved a 5-star hotel and several $1,000s charged to the corporate account at designer boutiques. It was a small thing, a detail anyone else would miss. To me, it was a loose thread. I began to pull. If the dates were a lie, what else was? My mind went to the lavish spending. I ran a new query on the corporate card expense system. This time searching for vendors specializing in high-end baby products, I found it almost immediately. A $20,000 charge from an exclusive infant furniture designer in Soho. The purchase order was for a complete nursery set. I checked the shipping address, expecting to see the penthouse she shared with my father. It wasn't. The destination was listed as Suite 1702, Dahlia Residences. I didn't recognize the address. I ran it through Virion & Vale's real estate holdings database. Dahlia Residences was a luxury apartment building downtown. Suite 1702 was a 3-bedroom unit leased by the company under a generic holding name. It was a ghost apartment, an off-the-books corporate condo used to discreetly house visiting board members or for sensitive negotiations. There was absolutely no legitimate reason to ship a nursery set there, unless the baby wasn't going to the penthouse, unless the baby wasn't even hers. The hypothesis bloomed in my mind, monstrous and yet perfectly logical. It explained everything. The timeline discrepancies, the secretive deliveries. It was a fraud of breathtaking audacity. Now, I needed to prove it. The next step was a significant escalation. Suspected financial misconduct gave me the authority I needed to review our corporate health insurance records. I logged into the provider's secure portal, my heart a steady, cold drum in my chest. I located Graham Calder's family plan. There she was, Savannah Calder, listed as the primary dependent, and there was the claim, a comprehensive maternity care package. But as I drilled down into the claim details, a critical anomaly appeared. The primary patient receiving the maternity services was not Savannah. It was another woman, listed as a dependent, with a relationship status of pending verification, a woman I had never heard of. This was the core of the deception. Savannah wasn't pregnant. She was sponsoring a pregnancy, using company funds to set up a surrogate in a secret apartment, all while performing the role of the glowing mother-to-be for the public, for my father, and for her followers. And I knew why. Her value, her entire brand, was now tied to this baby. I switched from the insurance portal to my own silo of archived data. 6 months ago, I had flagged an unusual contract passing through the legal department for review. It was between Savannah and a lifestyle branding agency. I had made a copy, my professional paranoia nagging at me. I opened the file now. The terms were explicit. It was a 6-figure endorsement deal for a line of modern motherhood products. The contract was contingent upon her authentic pregnancy journey, achieving a minimum of 30 million unique impressions across her social media platforms. The pregnancy wasn't just a lie to secure her position in my family. It was a commercial enterprise, a performance with a massive payout. Virion & Vale was not just a victim of this fraud, it was a co-conspirator. A quick search of the internal email server confirmed it. I found a chain between Savannah and our head of public relations. The subject, Baby Shower Synergy. The email read, Savannah, per our discussion, please coordinate all visuals and photo opportunities at the shower with the attached Q4 brand deck. We want to ensure the aesthetic aligns with the VNV New Beginnings campaign. My stomach tightened. They weren't just celebrating a baby. They were executing a marketing strategy. They were using corporate resources to amplify and legitimize her lie. The final piece of the puzzle required a direct intervention. As the head of risk, I was empowered to act in cases of suspected insurance fraud. I drafted a formal request to our account manager at the insurance company, citing the unverified dependent, the timeline inconsistencies from her travel schedule, and the unusual shipping destination for related corporate purchases. I requested an immediate, high-priority audit of the dependent's medical file. The response came back in less than an hour, flagged with the insurance company's red fraud alert banner. The representative's summary was concise and devastating. The medical file for the dependent was a shell. It contained no signed doctor's affidavits, no lab results, No medical history. The only documents on file were an initial consultation request and an appointment confirmation for a demonstration sonogram, the kind of illustrative, non-diagnostic scan often used for commercial purposes. The pregnancy was real, but its connection to Savannah was a complete fabrication, a ghost in the insurance system. I had it all: the motive, the means, the corporate complicity, and the proof. For the next 2 hours, I worked. I didn't write a story. I assembled a case. I opened our presentation software and chose the company's starkest, most professional template. On the title slide, I typed, "Risk Memorandum, an assessment of workplace violence, financial fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty." It was 18 pages long. Each slide was a cold, hard fact. Slide 2. The company's zero-tolerance policy on violence. Slide 3. The 7-second video from the supply closet. Slide 4. A timeline juxtaposing Savannah's magical moment sonogram post with her flight itinerary to Chicago. Slide 5. The invoice for the nursery set and the lease agreement for the ghost apartment at Dahlia Residences. Slide 6. A screenshot of the insurance claim, with the pending verification status circled in red. Slide 7. The terms of her 6-figure authentic pregnancy endorsement deal. Slide 8. The email from the PR department coordinating the baby shower with the corporate brand deck. Slide 9. The official fraud alert summary from the insurance provider. Each slide built upon the last, weaving the threads of violence, greed, and deception into an irrefutable tapestry of corruption. The final slide, page 18, was simple. It contained only 2 images. At the top was one of the photos from the medical office, a high-resolution, clinically lit close-up of my split lip and the angry red mark on my cheek. Below it, I inserted a bar graph. The title of the graph was Q4 Employee Wellness Fund Expenditures. A single, stark blue bar showed the quarterly budget. Next to it, a towering red bar, 4 times its size, showed the actual amount spent. Its label was simple: the baby shower. There was no commentary, none was needed. The slide presented the entire case in a single, brutal frame: the personal injury and the corporate crime, inextricably linked. One was the consequence of the other. My assault was just another fraudulent expense in their campaign of lies. I saved the file, attached it to a new, encrypted email on my personal device, and sent it to my lawyer. Then I printed one hard copy, clipped the pages together, and placed it in my briefcase. The clock on my screen read 8:45 a.m. It was time for my meeting. My 9 o'clock a.m. meeting with Robert Thorne never happened. I canceled it at 8:51, going to the company's general counsel, a man my father had appointed and whose loyalty was ultimately to the CEO. Would have been the proper channel. It would also have been a fatal mistake. Robert's job was to mitigate risk to the company, and the fastest way to mitigate this particular risk would be to bury it, and me along with it. My father's power was a gravitational force, bending the company's rules and ethics around him. To fight it, I couldn't go through the front door. I had to find a back channel, a different center of gravity. That center of gravity was Rhea Beckett. Rhea was the chair of the audit committee and a 20-year veteran of the board. She was a holdover from the pre-Graham Calder era. Appointed by my grandfather, she was sharp, unsentimental, and possessed an almost religious reverence for the sanctity of a clean balance sheet. She viewed the company not as a family empire, but as a publicly traded entity with a fiduciary duty to its shareholders. My father's "We Are One Family" branding, I knew, sat poorly with her. I didn't call her. I didn't email her. At 9:15, I took the elevator down to the ground floor, to the small, upscale coffee bar in the corner of the grand atrium. I knew she started every day there with a black Americano and the Wall Street Journal. She was a creature of habit, and in corporate warfare, predictable habits are exploitable vulnerabilities. She was sitting at her usual small table, her back to the wall. I approached quietly. "Rhea," I said. She looked up from her newspaper. Her eyes, shrewd and intelligent, taking me in. She noticed the faint discoloration on my cheek. But her expression didn't change. She was not a woman who dealt in gossip or sympathy. She dealt in facts. "Ava," she acknowledged, her tone neutral, cutting it fine for a workday. "I need 5 minutes of your time," I said, "on a matter of urgent audit concern." The specific phrasing was deliberate. Audit concern was her territory. It bypassed pleasantries and got straight to her function. She folded her newspaper with a crisp rustle and gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "You have 3. I didn't sit. I placed 2 sheets of paper, face down, on the table between us. On top of them, I placed a small gray USB drive, sealed in an anti-static evidence bag. "I am formally bringing a matter to the attention of the Audit Committee," I stated, my voice low and even. "The evidence I have compiled suggests a pattern of financial malfeasance, insurance fraud, and a significant breach of the company's code of conduct by a senior executive-adjacent individual." She didn't touch the papers. Her eyes remained locked on mine. "Executive-adjacent?" "My stepmother," Savannah called her. A flicker of something, not surprise, but perhaps confirmation, passed through her eyes. She picked up the first sheet of paper. It was the slide from my presentation, the photo of my bruised face next to the bar graph of the wellness fund expenditure. She studied it for a full 30 seconds, her gaze moving back and forth between the personal injury and the financial crime. She set it down and picked up the second page, a summary of the insurance fraud timeline. She read it, her lips a thin, hard line. She pushed the papers back toward the center of the table. She looked past me, out at the soaring glass walls of the atrium, at the Calder name etched in discreet letters above the main entrance. Her focus seemed 1,000 miles away. Then, her eyes snapped back to me, and they were as hard and clear as diamonds. She asked a single, quiet question. "Are you willing to burn it all?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the entire building around us. She wasn't asking if I was willing to expose Savannah. She was asking if I was willing to risk my father, my career, my name, the entire edifice of the Calder Empire. She was asking if I understood that a fire, once started, does not discriminate. "Only what's rotten," I replied, my voice unwavering. That was the answer she was looking for. A small, almost imperceptible nod. "There is a provision in the corporate bylaws," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "Section 9, paragraph 4. It allows for an emergency executive session of the board, excluding any member who is the subject of, or related to the subject of, a material internal complaint." She picked up the sealed USB drive. "I will convene the session for 4 o'clock this afternoon. Be prepared to present your findings." With that, she stood, tucked the USB drive into her briefcase, and walked away, leaving the 2 pieces of paper and her half-finished coffee on the table. Our meeting was over. I went back to my office. The first phase of the plan complete. The second phase was my insurance policy. I logged into a secure, anonymous portal on the website of Linton and Reeves, the external auditing firm that managed our corporate whistleblower hotline. I filed a formal report, detailing only the assault in the supply closet. I attached the time-stamped photos from the medical office and the SHA 256 hash of the video file. I did not mention Savannah's name. I simply listed the time, the location, and the nature of the incident. It was enough. An act of workplace violence, reported through this channel, triggered a non-negotiable protocol. I knew what would happen next. The report would go directly to the lead auditor at Linton and Reeves, who would then contact our head of IT forensics with a preservation order. Silently, invisibly, the system would begin to move. Somewhere in the server rooms in the building's sub-basement, a remote command would be sent. A complete, bit-for-bit image of Savannah's company-issued phone and laptop would be copied and secured, a digital snapshot of her entire corporate life. The counterattack came at 2:37 p.m. It was an email from Carol in HR. "Ava," it read, "it has come to my attention that you have scheduled a meeting with the General Counsel, and now I hear rumors of a board session. Please remember that all personnel matters are to be channeled through the Human Resources Department first. Bypassing established protocols is a serious breach of company policy. Please stand down on any further action until we can have a meeting to discuss this properly. It was a warning shot, an attempt to bully me back into their broken system. I typed my reply. It was a single sentence. Preserve all documents. I hit send. It was the legal equivalent of planting a flag on conquered ground. That phrase, preserve all documents, was a litigation hold trigger. It legally obligated them to cease all deletion of emails, records, and communications related to me, Savannah, and this entire affair. I had just turned their bureaucracy against them. The great glass clock in the atrium chimed 6 times. The sound echoed through the now empty office floors. The board's executive session had ended an hour ago. The sun was setting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city. A new chapter in the history of Virion and Vale had begun in a windowless room on the 40th floor, and the company would never be the same. The pieces were in motion. The silent, grinding gears of corporate justice, oiled by my own meticulous preparation. I pulled out my personal phone. I opened a new text message to Savannah. My thumbs moved over the screen, typing out the final move of the day. Congrats on the shower. Hope you got everything you wanted. See you tomorrow 9 a.m. All hands. I pressed send. The message delivered instantly, across the city, in her pristine penthouse. Her phone would have just lit up with a notification that was not a congratulation, but a summons. The next morning, the grand auditorium on the 3rd floor was a cathedral of corporate propaganda. A colossal banner hung above the stage. The Virion and Vale logo flanked by the words, Culture Day, We Are Family, in a soft, welcoming font. Hundreds of employees filed in, collecting complimentary branded water bottles and pastries, their faces a mixture of Monday morning fatigue and forced enthusiasm. It was an annual ritual, a day of speeches and team-building exercises designed to reinforce the company's carefully crafted image. Today, it was my stage. I had a 10-minute slot on the agenda, wedged between my father's opening remarks and a keynote from a motivational speaker. My request for time, submitted late the previous evening, had been approved without question. A Q4 risk update from the CEO's daughter sounded innocuous, a routine piece of corporate housekeeping that would fit neatly into the day's program. No one suspected it was a declaration of war. I sat in the front row with the rest of the executive team. Savannah was there, seated next to my father, glowing under the stage lights. She wore a powder blue dress, her hand resting protectively on her prosthetic bump. She caught my eye and gave me a small, triumphant smile, the kind a queen gives to a courtier she's about to have dismissed. She thought my text message was a sign of surrender. She thought I had been cowed. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., my father strode to the podium. The room fell silent. He was a master of this stage, his voice resonating with a practiced, paternal warmth. He spoke of the company's successes, of the challenges they had overcome together, as a family. Then, he turned his gaze on Savannah, his face softening into a portrait of doting husband and father-to-be. And as we celebrate our corporate family, he boomed, his voice thick with emotion, I want to share my own personal joy. Savannah and I are so excited to welcome the newest member of the Virion and Vale family, a little V&V baby that represents a new generation, a new beginning for all of us. A wave of warm, sympathetic applause washed through the auditorium. He beamed, accepting their adoration. He was selling them a story, and they were buying it wholesale. My stomach churned, but my face remained a placid, unreadable mask. When he finished, he introduced me. And now, for a brief update on our risk management strategy. My daughter, Ava Calder. I walked onto the stage. The click of my heels on the polished wood, the only sound in the vast room. I felt the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. I adjusted the microphone, my movements calm and deliberate. The remote for the presentation felt cool and solid in my hand. In the front row, I could see my father giving me a small, encouraging nod. I could see Savannah, looking bored, already scrolling through something on her phone. I took a deep breath and clicked the remote. The massive LED screen behind me, 40 feet wide, flickered to life. The first slide appeared. It was stark white text on a V&V blue background. It read, "Workplace Safety, a Zero-Tolerance Mandate." A low murmur rippled through the audience. This was not the expected presentation on market volatility or cybersecurity threats. I let the slide hang there for a moment, letting the words sink in. "Good morning," I began, my voice amplified, filling every corner of the room. "As we celebrate our culture today, I want to address the most critical component of that culture, the safety and security of every single person in this room." Click. The next slide was dense with text, a direct screenshot of the company's Code of Conduct. Section 3, Subsection C. I highlighted the key phrase in yellow. "Any reported instance of such behavior is subject to a mandatory and immediate investigation, with no exceptions for seniority or position." This policy, I continued, my voice level, is not a suggestion, it is a promise. It is the foundation upon which our family is built. It guarantees that this is a safe place for everyone. I paused. I could see Savannah looking up from her phone now, a faint line of annoyance creasing her brow. My father looked confused. I had their attention. "Yesterday," I said, "this promise was broken." Click. The screen went black for a half-second, and then it was filled with the grainy, clinical footage from the supply closet camera. There was no sound. There didn't need to be. The entire auditorium saw it simultaneously, the door closing. Savannah's face contorted in rage, her arms swinging in a vicious arc, and my head snapping back from the force of the blow. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was followed by a silence so profound, so absolute, that I could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of the audio equipment. From somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, there was a distinct clatter and splash as someone dropped their coffee cup. I let the silent, 7-second loop play a second time, and a third. A brutal, undeniable ballet of violence, magnified 100 times, playing out for the entire company to see. I clicked the remote again, and the screen went back to the blue V&V logo. I looked out at the sea of shocked, stunned faces. "The policy," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "applies to everyone." "That's a lie. It's edited." Savannah was on her feet, her voice a shrill, panicked shriek. Her face was ashen, the carefully applied makeup a grotesque mask of disbelief and fury. "She's lying. That video is fake." My father, his face the color of chalk, was trying to pull her back down into her seat, whispering frantically at her. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at the board members seated in the front row, their faces grim, unreadable slates of stone. I did not respond to her outburst. I simply raised the remote. Click. A new slide appeared. It was titled, "Financial and Insurance Irregularities." On the left was a copy of the insurance provider's fraud alert summary. On the right was a timeline. One column showed the dates of Savannah's bump update posts. The other showed her conflicting corporate travel itinerary. Click. The next slide. A satellite map with a red pin dropped on Dahlia Residences. Next to it, the corporate lease agreement for Suite 1702 and the $20,000 invoice for a nursery set, delivered to that address. The murmuring in the crowd grew into a low, rumbling roar of confusion and dawning comprehension. Savannah stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her accusations of fake video dying on her lips. She was watching her entire fabricated world being systematically dismantled, slide by slide, in front of an audience of hundreds. I looked at my father. The blood had drained from his face. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a horrified, dawning understanding. He wasn't just seeing a corporate crisis. He was seeing a betrayal, a coup, orchestrated by his own daughter on the biggest stage imaginable. I had shown them the violence. I had shown them the fraud. I had given them the means, the motive, and the cover-up. The room was a tinderbox, and I had just struck the match. Now, it was time to contain the fire. I turned my body slightly, addressing my words not to the crowd, but directly to Rhea Beckett and the other board members in the front row. I lowered the microphone, but in the ringing silence, my voice carried with absolute clarity. "I request an executive session of the board," I said, my tone not one of request, but of demand. Now, the journey from the auditorium to the 40th floor boardroom was a silent, surreal procession. The stunned employees parted before us like a receding tide. My father and Savannah were escorted to a separate waiting room, their presence deemed a conflict of interest. I walked alongside Rhea Beckett and the rest of the board's independent directors. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said by the glaring pixels on the auditorium screen. The boardroom was a cold, sterile space of glass, steel, and dark mahogany. We took our seats around the massive table. The only people present were the 8 independent board members, myself, and a man I didn't recognize, introduced as Marcus Thorne from Latham & Watkins, the board's external legal counsel. A small professional-grade audio recorder was placed in the center of the table. Marcus pressed the record button. A small red light blinked on. The session was officially underway. "Ms. Calder," Rhea began, her voice devoid of any emotion, "you have made a series of extraordinarily serious allegations. The floor is yours to present your evidence." I said nothing. I reached into my briefcase and retrieved a single, sealed evidence bag containing the USB drive I had shown her that morning. I slid it across the polished surface of the table. It came to a stop directly in front of her. "Everything is on there," I said. "The unedited video file with its SHA-256 hash for verification, a complete breakdown of the fraudulent expenditures from the Wellness Fund, the corresponding insurance claims and the provider's fraud alert, and the complete data logs from the forensic image of Savannah Calder's corporate mobile device, as secured this morning by Linton and Reeves." Marcus, the external counsel, took the drive. He plugged it into a laptop, his movements swift and practiced. For 15 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft clicking of his keyboard as he navigated the files. He projected the key documents onto the screen at the end of the room for the board to see. He played the 7-second video once, without commentary. He displayed the email from my father's account. He showed them the spreadsheets, the invoices, the insurance alerts. It was a clinical, dispassionate presentation of fact. When he was finished, he turned to face the board. "The evidence presented by Ms. Calder is prima facie and appears to be well documented and verifiable," he stated, his tone grave. "From a legal perspective, the company is facing multiple significant vectors of risk. On the criminal front, there is substantial evidence pointing to insurance fraud and felony embezzlement of corporate funds. On the civil front, the video evidence confirms a clear case of workplace battery, creating significant liability. The company's prior handling of a similar incident, as evidenced by the NDA with a former employee, establishes a pattern of negligence that could lead to punitive damages. We must assume that all of this is now discoverable." The room was heavy with the weight of his words. Criminal liability, punitive damages. These were the phrases that haunted the nightmares of board members. "What is your recommendation, Ms. Calder?" Rhea asked, her gaze fixed on me. "You brought this to us. What is your proposed solution?" This was the moment. They weren't just judging my evidence. They were judging my capability, my strategic thinking. I had anticipated the question. I slid a single sheet of paper from a folder, a summary of my mitigation plan. "My recommendation is a 4-point action plan for immediate implementation," I said, my voice steady. 1. Immediate and indefinite suspension of Savannah Calder from all company premises and activities, pending the results of a full, independent investigation. 2. We must self-report the insurance irregularities to our provider to mitigate charges of concealment. 3. An internal communication must be sent to all employees, reinforcing our zero-tolerance policy and announcing the launch of an independent investigation into both the misuse of funds and the handling of workplace safety complaints. This will control the narrative and demonstrate accountability. 4. A full audit of the Wellness Fund must be initiated. with the goal of clawing back all misappropriated funds. I finished. The plan was aggressive but necessary. It was about cauterizing the wound, containing the infection before it could spread and poison the entire organization. One of the other board members, a retired tech CEO named Peterson, cleared his throat. This is all well and good for the influencer, but what about Graham, the CEO? It was the question everyone was waiting for. Ria's eyes bored into me. What about the CEO's knowledge, Ava? I did not flinch. I did not look away. This was the hardest part, the move that would sever the last remaining thread of my old life. I directed their attention to the screen, where Marcus had the email chain still displayed. As you can see from the final email in this chain, the CEO was sent the full, itemized budget for the baby shower, a budget that exceeded the quarterly fund allocation by over 300%. I pointed to the bottom of the email. And here is his reply, a single word, approved, followed by his own annotation, family optics. He knew the cost, and he approved it, justifying it not as a legitimate corporate expense, but for personal and public relations reasons. That is a direct breach of his fiduciary duty to this company and its shareholders. The final nail was in the coffin. The silence that followed was absolute. Ria looked around the table, meeting the eye of each director in turn. No one spoke. No one needed to. "We need a vote," she said, her voice like the gavel of a judge. "First, on the matter of Savannah Calder." She raised her hand. "All in favor of immediate and indefinite suspension." 8 hands went up instantly. "Motion carries unanimously." "Second," she continued, her face a mask of grim resolve. "On the matter of the CEO, Graham Calder, I move that he be placed on a mandatory temporary leave of absence, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the independent investigation." She raised her hand again. "All in favor." One by one, the hands went up around the table. It was done. "The motion carries unanimously," Ria declared. "Marcus, please coordinate with IT and security. A comprehensive data preservation order is to be issued for the entire executive suite. All access privileges for Savannah Calder and Graham Calder are to be revoked. Now." Marcus was already typing on his phone. Somewhere deep in the building's infrastructure, a switch was flipped. A digital door was slammed shut. In the waiting room down the hall, Savannah's corporate access card had just become a useless piece of plastic. The tension in the room broke. The board members began speaking in low, urgent tones, discussing the logistics of appointing an interim CEO, of drafting the press release. My part was over. I had presented my case, and the system, for once, had worked. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely weak. I gathered my papers, my movements slow and deliberate. As I turned to leave, I paused and looked at the board members. "I didn't want to break the family," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But in the sudden quiet, it carried. "I wanted to save the company." Ria Beckett looked up at me, her face etched with the fatigue of the last few hours. For the first time, a flicker of something other than stern duty crossed her features. It might have been understanding. It might have been respect. "Sometimes, Ava," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "That's the same thing." The negotiation took place the following morning in a neutral conference room on the 35th floor, a space typically reserved for mediating disputes with outside contractors. The air was thick with a toxic, unspoken history. On one side of the polished granite table sat Savannah and her lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Julian. On the other side sat Ria Beckett, Marcus Thorne, the board's counsel, and me. My father was also present, at his own insistence, though he was there as a spectator, not a participant. He was a king in exile, forced to watch as others decided the fate of his kingdom. He looked haggard, a decade older than he had 2 days ago. Julian began, his tone smooth and conciliatory, as if we were all reasonable people who had simply gotten carried away. "We're all hoping to resolve this matter quickly and discreetly," he said, directing his words primarily to Ria. "For the good of the company, My client is prepared to reimburse the full cost of the baby shower. In return, we propose that all materials related to the incident in the supply closet be permanently destroyed, and a joint statement be issued citing a private, family misunderstanding that has been amicably resolved. He was offering to erase it, to bury the violence and the fraud under a pile of money and a well-crafted lie. It was the Virion and Vale way. It was the way things had always been done. I didn't let Rhea or Marcus respond. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the cool table. "That offer is rejected," I said, my voice cutting through the placid atmosphere. "Here are our terms. They are not negotiable." I pushed a single sheet of paper across the table. "First, your client will provide a signed, written admission of the physical assault, to be held in escrow by the board. Second, she will sign a binding agreement, with severe financial penalties for violation, never to contact or approach any employee of this company again. Third, she will make a full and complete restitution of all improperly billed expenses from the last 2 years, not just the party, the total of which will be determined by our independent auditors. And fourth, she will immediately terminate the endorsement contract that was predicated on her pregnancy." Julian let out a short, derisive laugh. He picked up the paper as if it were contaminated. "This is absurd. It's an extortion tactic." He tossed the paper back. He leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face, and played what he believed was his ace. "Frankly, no one will ever believe she faked a pregnancy. It's too fantastic. It's the word of a disgruntled daughter against a beloved public figure. You have no credible proof." I held his gaze. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply opened my laptop, turned it to face him, and clicked a file. On the screen was a transcript of a text message exchange, retrieved from the forensic backup of Savannah's phone. It was between her and her stylist. The message from the stylist read, "For the press event tomorrow, are we going with the small pad or the full 6-month prosthetic? Need to know for the wardrobe." Savannah's reply was instantaneous. "Full 6. We need the drama." Beneath the transcript, I displayed the corresponding invoice from a Hollywood special effects company for a custom-molded silicone pregnancy prosthetic. The date on the invoice was from 2 months before the baby shower. The smug look on Julian's face dissolved. The color drained from Savannah's. The room was utterly silent. I had just shown them the stage directions to her 9-month performance. It was then that my father spoke, his voice cracking with a desperation I had never heard before. "Ava, please," he pleaded, his eyes begging me. "Enough. Stop this. Think of the family. What this will do to our name." For a single, fleeting moment, the weight of his plea hit me. The years of trying to earn his approval, the ghost of the family we once were. But then I saw the supply closet. I felt the sting on my cheek. I saw the laughing faces at the party. The moment passed. I turned my head and looked directly at him, my voice as cold and hard as the granite table between us. Family would not hit me at work. His face crumpled. He had no answer. There was no answer. I had just drawn a line in the sand, separating the personal from the professional, the myth of our family from the reality of the corporation. Savannah, who had been preternaturally still, made a small, choking sound. Her composure finally shattered. She looked at her lawyer, her eyes wide with panic. Julian saw it too. He saw his case, his leverage, and his client's future evaporating in real time. He leaned over and whispered something urgently in her ear. She shook her head violently. He whispered again, more forcefully this time. Finally, he straightened up, his face a grim mask. "We need a moment to confer with our client. We request a brief recess." Rhea Beckett, who had been watching the entire exchange with the silent patience of a predator, glanced at the clock on the wall. "The clock is ticking. Julian," she said, her voice flat and final. "The board has authorized the release of a public statement detailing the findings of our preliminary investigation. That statement goes out at noon. You have until then to accept our terms." The threat was absolute. Capitulate, or be destroyed in the court of public opinion. Julian nodded curtly and ushered a visibly trembling Savannah out of the room. My father followed them, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The door clicked shut, leaving Rhea, Marcus, and me alone in the silent room. The tension slowly bled out of the air, replaced by the quiet hum of the building's ventilation system. I caught my reflection in the dark, mirrored glass of the conference room wall. The bruise on my cheek had faded to a faint, yellowish shadow, almost invisible. The split on my lip was gone. There was no visible trace of the assault, but my eyes were different. They were clear, sharp, and resolute. Marcus pushed a document in front of me. It was a formal authorization, granting Rhea the board's full proxy to proceed with the public disclosure if the noon deadline was not met. There was a single line at the bottom for my signature, above the word, "Proceed." I picked up the pen. The negotiation was over. The last move was mine. I signed my name. The noon deadline passed in the funereal silence of the conference room. Savannah's lawyer did not return. The choice had been made for them. At 12:01 p.m., a series of pre-written, legally vetted communications were dispatched from a secure server in the legal department, a digital cascade that would irrevocably alter the landscape of Virion and Vale. The first was the internal email. The subject line was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism, a statement on workplace safety and the misuse of corporate funds. It went out to all 12,000 employees simultaneously. The language was cold, precise, and devoid of emotion. It spoke of the company's unwavering commitment to its ethical code. It announced the launch of a full, independent investigation to be conducted by the third-party firm Linton & Reeves. It informed the staff that, pending the results of this investigation, CEO Graham Calder would be taking a temporary leave of absence, and that Savannah Calder had been suspended from all company activities, effective immediately. Seconds later, the second wave hit. The official press release. It was broadcast to the wire services, financial news outlets, and industry publications. The language was even more cautious, scrubbed clean of any detail that could invite a lawsuit, but the message was just as stark. The key phrases were a death knell to the old regime. Independent board action. Comprehensive review of internal controls. Commitment to full transparency. The appointment of the company's long-serving COO, Michael Jennings, as interim CEO was announced in the final paragraph, a small measure intended to reassure a nervous stock market. The final communication was for internal consumption only. A post appeared on the company's intranet portal, the main landing page for all employees. It featured a short, written statement from the board, reiterating the message of the email, but below the text was an embedded video player. It contained the 7 seconds of footage from the supply closet. Following legal guidance, the faces were blurred, rendering both Savannah and me anonymous figures in a corporate training video. But the action was perfectly clear. The raised arm, the violent swing, the sickening snap of a head thrown back. The caption beneath it read, "This conduct will not be tolerated. There are no exceptions." At 1 p.m., I stood on the same auditorium stage I had occupied 28 hours earlier. This time, the mood was not one of forced celebration, but of tense, watchful silence. The town hall was voluntary, but the room was packed. I looked out at the faces of my colleagues. "Yesterday, I told you that our safety policy was a promise," I said, my voice calm and amplified in the quiet hall. "Today, the board has acted to honor that promise. The investigation will be independent and it will be thorough. From this moment forward, this company will operate under a new guiding principle." I leaned closer to the microphone, letting my words land with the weight of a verdict. No exceptions, no optics above ethics. I held their gaze for a long moment, then simply said, "Thank you," and walked off the stage. There was no applause. There was something more meaningful, a slow, collective exhale, as if the entire building had been holding its breath for years. The fallout was immediate and visible. From my office window, which overlooked the main entrance, I saw a small crowd of paparazzi that had already gathered on the sidewalk. At 2:15 p.m., a side door opened, and a figure emerged, flanked by building security. It was Savannah. She wore dark sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled down low, but it was unmistakably her. She moved quickly, her head down, rushing toward a black SUV waiting at the curb. An internal communications photographer, tasked with documenting the day, was in the lobby. He lifted his camera and took a single, unplanned shot through the plate glass window. The angle was a fluke of timing and light. It caught her in mid-stride. Just as she turned, in her haste, her posture was less than perfect. The carefully constructed silhouette was gone. The pregnant belly, which had been the symbol of her ascendancy, had visibly deflated, collapsing inward as she scrambled into the waiting car. The power shift was solidified by a memo from the interim CEO at 4 p.m., confirming the board's decision and outlining the transitional leadership structure. The machine of Virion and Vale was already moving on, its gears grinding forward without its founder at the helm. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby at the end of the day, a small group of women from the marketing department got on at the 19th floor. They fell silent when they saw me. As they exited on the 15th floor, one of them, a junior associate I barely knew, paused at the door. She wouldn't meet my eye, but she spoke just loud enough for me to hear. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. Back in my office, an email was waiting for me. It was from Carol in HR. The subject line was simple. Apology. The message was formal, official, and deeply humiliating for the sender. It acknowledged the department's failure to properly investigate the previous incident with the executive assistant and formally apologized for the threatening tone of her email to me the day before. It was a complete and unconditional surrender. I packed my briefcase, the sense of victory a cold, hollow feeling in my chest. I had won. I had purged the corruption, but the cost was the final, absolute destruction of my family. As I walked through the darkened parking garage toward my car, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. It contained only 3 words. "Check your car." A chill snaked down my spine. I quickened my pace, my heels echoing in the vast, empty space. I rounded the concrete pillar to my parking spot, and there it was. Tucked under the driver's side windshield wiper was a plain, white business envelope. There was no name, no address. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it free. The paper was crisp, cold from the evening air. I tore it open. Inside were 2 items. The first was a brand new, unopened pregnancy test, still sealed in its foil wrapper. The second was a single, folded sheet of high-quality stationery. I unfolded it. It was completely blank. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass of my office, a silent observer in my own life. 28 floors below, the city was a sprawling circuit board of light and motion, indifferent to the quiet cataclysm that had occurred within these walls. 2 men in a suspended cradle were methodically taking down the "We Are Family" banner from the building's facade. They worked with a practiced, dispassionate efficiency, rolling up the massive vinyl letters, turning our foundational lie into a tidy, manageable cylinder. It was just another job for them. For me, it was the end of an epic. The blank, sterile envelope from the parking garage sat on my desk. I hadn't opened it further. The message was not in the contents, but in the act of giving them to me, the unopened test, a symbol of a potential future she had tried to steal. The blank page, a canvas for a story she could no longer write. It was a final, pathetic attempt at a psychological barb, a ghost of a threat from a ghost of a power. I swept it into the waste bin. My focus was not on the past, but on the final, irrevocable step that lay before me. A soft chime emanated from my desktop. It was a secure message from Rhea Beckett. There was no greeting. There was only a single attachment, a draft of a formal board resolution. I opened it. The document was dense with legal terminology, but the title of the new role it created was stark and clear. Acting Head of Risk and Ethics. It was a provisional appointment, pending the conclusion of the investigation, but the implication was absolute. They weren't just giving me a promotion. They were handing me the keys to the cleanup, sanctioning my methods by institutionalizing them. It was a department of one, with a mandate to rebuild the company's moral compass from the ground up. My cursor blinked in the reply field. There were 1,000 things I could have said, 100 complexities to acknowledge, but the moment called for something else. It called for the same cold, unambiguous clarity I had demanded from them. I typed a single word, yes. I hit send. Then, I turned my attention to the final email. It was one I had drafted late last night, after the board meeting, in the hollow, echoing hours before dawn. It sat on my screen now, a weapon waiting to be fired. The recipients were not internal. They were the senior partners at Linton & Reeves and the head of the corporate fraud division at our insurance provider. The subject line was simple: Virion and Vale, formal notification and submission of evidence. The body of the email was brief, a formal cover letter stating that, as per my new responsibilities, I was officially transmitting materials relevant to their pending investigations. The attachments were the real payload: the unedited video file, the complete, annotated expense reports, the insurance fraud alert, the forensic image of Savannah's phone, with its damning text messages and invoices, the NDA from the previous incident. It was the entire case, a digital briefcase of irrefutable truth. This was the final cut. Sending this email was not about internal justice. It was about externalizing the truth, about placing it beyond the reach of corporate influence forever. It ensured that no future board, no new CEO, not even my father, should he ever return, could bury what had happened. It was an act of salting the earth. It was my resignation from the family and my enlistment in the cause of consequence. My hand rested on the mouse. The small white arrow hovered over the blue send button. The cursor on the button pulsed with a soft, steady rhythm, a digital heartbeat counting down to the point of no return. In that stretched second, the world seemed to fall silent. Then, a sound behind me, the soft, almost imperceptible ding of the executive elevator arriving at my floor. It was followed by the sound of the doors sliding open, and then the soft, measured cadence of footsteps on the marble floor of the hallway. The footsteps grew closer, stopping just outside the open door to my office. A shadow fell across the threshold. Silence. The presence behind me was a physical weight in the air. I could feel their gaze on my back. It could have been my father, coming to make one last, desperate plea. It could have been Rhea, coming to witness the final act. It could have been a security guard on his nightly rounds. It didn't matter. The past was behind me. My future, the company's future, was on the screen in front of me. I did not turn around. My fingers tightened on the mouse. I clicked. The paper airplane icon, the small, universal symbol of a message in flight, appeared for a fleeting moment and then vanished. It was gone. The truth was out of my hands. It was in the system, a ghost in 1,000 servers, multiplying and propagating, beyond my control, beyond anyone's control. It was finally, irrevocably, real. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So please let me know in the comments below and share your thoughts on Ava's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. And if you'd like to help this story reach more people, you can support us further by hitting that hype button. It helps more than you know.